Good afternoon. This is Pseudonymous. Instead of this rubbish course, you'll be treated to my course. This Professor Limnell.
No, this is my course. Go!
Okay, good afternoon, everybody here in lecture hall, as well as digitally following this lecture series. And this is actually the last time this autumn in this Aalto University's Internet Forum 2022 lecture series. And I have to say that I have been very happy that we have had so good lectures so far. And as you know, the theme has been and is technology, security, and future. And that's something that is going to affect all of us. So today is our last time together in this lecture series this autumn. And we will have, I can promise you in advance, 2 excellent lectures coming once again. First, longtime friend, excellent expert in crisis management, risk analysis, and many other issues, Mikaeli Langinvainio, who is CEO in Inclus. I think he will tell you a little bit more about this company as well and about their solutions. And after Mikaeli, we will have the final lecture of this lecture series, and that is given by Estonian ambassador here in Finland, Sven Sakkov, who has also been in his former life director of this cybersecurity center of NATO in Tallinn. Please send questions, comments in chat. I will ask those questions to lecturers. And I would say, without further notice, warm welcome, Mikaeli. I have to ask you, when was the last time that you were in Aalto University?
Well, actually, we are working here in Otaniemi, basically at Aalto University's premises, so I'm here every day.
Excellent, every day. Good, please, floor is yours, and excellent to have you here.
Thank you so much. Good evening from my part as well. I'm going to talk to you about managing complex risks. First, I'll go through a couple of global scenarios that we are foreseeing developing in the world, then diving a little bit deeper into the emerging risks and threats of the world in a global level. I'm going to give you some examples how we utilized technology in peace mediation processes, primarily with CMI, Peace Mediation Office of President Martti Ahtisaari and some other organizations, from where we developed certain methodologies based on multi-criteria cross-impact analysis tools to do basically complex risk analysis. And then I'm going to show you some examples also on how to actually dissect those wicked problems and threats into manageable pieces. If we start with the current situation, we already see that the global security actors, the leaders of the superpowers, are having completely differing worldviews, and we see them colliding today. We see the rise of totalitarian rule and the sort of struggle of democracies. And for example, when we saw Rishi Sunak taking the Prime Minister's job in the UK, one of the first things was when he was lighting some candles in front of his house. And that is a sort of a Hindu ritual. Probably we don't know too much about what is his worldview, what are his gods, how does he see the world. Does it have any relevance for the security architecture of Europe? Perhaps not. But the point is that it's very hard for us to understand the different worldviews which are driving the global security decisions today. Therefore, scenario analysis can help to sort of understand the different directions the world may take in terms of these larger developments. We have 5 key scenarios at hand. We have war in Russia, war in Ukraine with Russia. We all also know that as a consequence, it is almost certain that Russia will have an internal crisis at some point. It will also have certain scenarios. What are those scenarios is another question. Then there's also a scenario of Russia-NATO escalation, which is also quite likely depending on how deep escalation we are talking about. Then we are seeing the new military posture of China, especially threatening Taiwan, and we can see that there is possible at least deepening trade war between China and Taiwan, and consequently between China and the US and the West. We also know that President Trump did not leave the office peacefully. Also, he took some 10,000 documents along with him because he doesn't recognize the current presidency. And there is still uncertainty in the US internal power struggle, how it will end. Those are certain scenarios that we are looking at. From those scenarios, we have different triggering events, driving factors, indicators, and they are providing implications to our societies at large. And those impacts or implications then again produce risks for us as individuals, as companies, and they will have impact on us. But we can dissect those huge scenarios into implications to risks and understand and manage these things. If we look at the war in Ukraine, we have 5 basic scenarios. We know that it's already hugely detrimental conflict, especially for Ukraine, of course for Russia as well. Even up to 30,000 civilians killed, up to 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed, wounded or captured, 70 to even 100,000 Russian soldiers killed or wounded, and GDP of Ukraine will melt down 45% this year. War is always unpredictable, but the scenario work can help there. What it would entail that Russia would lose, what it would require, certain indicators or developments mentioned here. The heavy assistance from NATO would help Ukraine to stop and successfully properly counter the Russians' advance, as they have been successfully doing the past 2 months. Europe will be or should be withstanding with united front the energy crisis, even with potential sort of sabotage attacks from Russia to the energy infrastructure of Europe. And we would need to see more sanction rounds collapsing almost Russian economy. And Putin would need to resort to further mobilization, and the public opinion in Russia could turn against his regime. And that could mean that there could be a fear of mass protest, and Putin would need to withdraw the troops, but that's quite unlikely. Furthermore, the command chain or the front line would collapse, and it would mean that Ukraine would win and there would be a sovereign democracy. This is, and then possibly with the domestic discontent, of course, towards Putin, he would be overthrown in 24 March presidential elections. It's possible, it's not likely yet, it's possible, it's perhaps even somewhat unlikely at this hour. Ukraine losing, what it would mean, of course, Ukraine collapsing on the weight of Russian invasion, NATO united but helpless. There would be, for sure, of course, a long-term insurgency against the invaders and robust assistance from the West. There could be sort of a guerrilla warfare for 10 years in Ukraine, and eventually it would mean that Russia would withdraw. This is very unlikely scenario as it is. Then how NATO-Russia war or NATO-Russia relations could escalate towards a war. It would need to step up the heavy supply of weaponry, Poland and Baltic states to get reinforced NATO troops, Finland and Sweden to NATO. Sanctions would be crushing Russians, and Russia blaming already actually blaming US for the Nord Stream pipeline attacks and Ukraine on dirty bomb plan. If Russia uses weapons of mass destruction, that would be the red line for NATO retaliation, and possibly an attack on Russian bases, for example, inside Ukraine first. That could mean also ultimatums for nuclear retaliation, depending if Russia is using tactical nuclear weapons, but possibly also gas or dirty bombs, as they've been sort of hinting. This could lead to a horrific scenario of escalating towards nuclear weapon exchanges and towards World War III. This is luckily very unlikely, but there is certain level of escalation that Russia is even likely to sort of push the situation into, in order to justify the war in Ukraine more widely to the war in the West. Then if we look at what are the sort of a path to peace, we would need to see, of course, common ground for negotiations, Russia withdrawing, Ukraine sort of adopting a neutral posture, neutral state between Russia and the EU, and the state of Crimea, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Donbas should be settled as well. Perhaps a START 3 agreement would be forged and Putin would retire peacefully, and coalition government in Moscow would be developed to restore the relations in the West. Of course, this is somewhat sort of a even utopistic scenario at this date, at least what comes to the sort of coalition government in Russia. It's quite unlikely that we are seeing a traditional peace process as this. Then we can look at the stalemate scenario. There's no sort of military solution at sight. Ceasefire will be probably at some point negotiated, and perhaps a wider political settlement, but usually and very quite often ceasefires are broken, and the forces are grouping and regrouping for occasional offensive. There could be potential peace negotiations and perhaps even a continuation war. Death of Putin at some time, there have been a lot of speculation about his death for natural causes or due illness, but it's not now likely that he will be that ill either. If he would die, for example, for natural causes 27, that could open a window of opportunity. But then again, the elite is also quite hardliner, and it would probably mean that there could be another sort of a hardliner following him. What this stalemate scenario could look like for Europe and in the world, the oil price rising even to over 100 USDs next year, Europe plunging even to recession, slow global economic growth. Perhaps then Democratic Party, luckily they didn't lose now in the midterms, and the red wave didn't happen. What will happen then in the presidential elections will be seen. US will double down military aid for Ukraine. EU embargo on Russian energy is set. Palace coups probably already happening in Moscow, probably well sort of countered at this moment, but there could be an additional palace coup failing to overthrow Putin and the totalitarian rule tightens. As there is also problem with the wheat export from the Ukraine, it could mean also regional turmoil in the Middle East, North Africa region, sort of sparking Arab Spring 2.0 type of situation and refugee flows into Europe. Also, global arms race is now intensifying. Internet is also splintering to smaller sort of nodes in that sense. International cooperation would get tighter. And then China supporting Russia and also threatening basically Taiwan with at least a military embargo could mean that there could be some sort of attack or provocation towards Taiwan as well in Asia. So horrific scenario if there could be another Ukraine, but in Asia. Here they are having a training outside Taiwan on sort of doing a massive military exercise. There's also four scenarios for Taiwan or the war between or the trade war at least between China and Taiwan. If there would be complete disintegration from the global economy and at the same time full mobilization or militarization, it could mean an Asian Cold War scenario. And it would, of course, then cut the ties to the West. There's also a possibility of Chinese order if there would be a change in the US regime and withdrawal from the Pacific sort of security guarantees that US have been promising for Taiwan and also other nations, and it would leave more room for Chinese order in Asia. The geo-economic Asia, meaning that there would be a lot of sort of sanctions and sort of limitations for the technology, import, export especially, and the support for Russia would also increase. And this is sort of the quite likely scenario that we are already seeing. Trading Asia, that there would be sort of a dilution of the sanctions, and also the support for Russia would be then the fourth scenario. So these are the sort of big scenarios, and we could dive in deeper to these different scenarios. These are developed by Mikael Vigel and Christian Feder from FIA, and these are interesting scenarios. This is now in Finnish, but if we talk about still a little bit on the security climate, there was a news about a silenced report or buried report revealing a threat picture in Finland if there would be internal turmoil in Russia. Well, actually, I wrote this report that they wrote about, but I didn't respond to it that much either. But there was analysis done on what sort of refugee situations there could be if there would be internal strife or struggle in Russia. If we come closer to Finland, still some Finnish politicians, for example, there was Kouvola Security Conference, well-meaning and probably the purpose of the comment is clear, but Sari Essayah, for example, mentioned that, I repeat, nothing is threatening Finland militarily. There's still this sort of mantra that if we are not seeing full-on invasion possibility towards Finland, that there's no military threat. That is simply wrong. There's of course threat, and threat can be thought of intent times capability, and there is most likely intent, and Russia showed very much capability in the Nord Stream attacks. And I've been asked how likely it is that it was Russia. You can never say that I'm completely sure, but I'm almost completely certain. So, of course, it was Russia's operation, and a huge operation just happened 2 months ago, and we have already sort of gone past that. But it poses a clear and present military threat to Finland and the West. If we look at the hybrid threats, we can see that there's also other type of threats than open attacks or somewhat covert attacks, but having acute effect and also having chronic effect. And there's multiple different ways to destabilize our political system, our social fabric, our economy, our resilience, and so on. There's dozens and dozens of different ways in hybrid warfare that can hamper our ability to function as a unified nation and unified Europe. These are some mentions of this. Poisoning water supply, character attacks against politicians. I don't know what it would entail. For example, well, not going there too much now. Disinformation, social polarization between Finnish and Russians inside Finland, refugees as weapons. We have already seen some of these, disputing the election results, funding of subversing international organizations, etc. We are seeing a lot of different possibilities of hybrid threats, which are basically by definition threats which are directed towards the vulnerabilities of the enemy. Then we can see also rising low probability, high impact risks, uncontrolled cyber attack vector, a cyber attack getting completely out of hand, bioterrorism, data security, mass leaks of quantum machines. There's a series of severe natural disasters, sudden melting glaciers of causing floods, serious food security disturbances, overpopulation, lack of vision among the young people, mental health problems, tropical storms in new areas, etc. There's a lot of different sort of slowly emerging risks, but then also suddenly emerging risks that we can envision and foresee. Some of those we have weak signals already, some of those we have strong evidence already. Okay, this was sort of painting the picture of the global risk sort of picture in a sense, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've been using technology in peace mediation first and then in complex risk management. Inclus is the company where I'm from. I was originally official in the Finnish government for 10 years, then worked for 5 years at CMI in peace mediation activities, leading a methods and tools unit, and then 2016 onwards I established and I'm CEO of Inclus, which is an inclusive risk management software. But we utilized this tool from 2011 onwards in various peace mediation processes around the globe, basically, mainly in Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, helping the conflict parties to analyze the conflict drivers, especially in the internal conflicts and civil wars. In mediation, you have a sort of a peace mediation pyramid developed by Denis Matveev, where you sort of have certain steps towards the peace agreement. And you need diplomatic encounters, dialogue in the first stages of the process, but you move onwards towards shared analysis and joint problem solving in a sense. And their joint planning tools can help a lot the conflict parties to understand and see from each other's perspectives also the problems. What we did was we listed the issues, then we thought what are the criteria that we want to assess those issues with the conflict parties so that they provide the assessment on security, political, information infrastructure, judicial, etc. problems that the conflicts are producing and the root causes of that conflict. Thinking about what sort of urgency the different parties are having, what is the maybe opportunities to solve something, and to understand maybe the win-win solutions and avoid the lose-lose scenarios. What issues are driving the conflicts? What are the most pressing issues if there's opportunities or threats? So we did these sort of multi-criteria assessments. I can show you from the browser soon how we actually conduct these. Also cross-impact analysis we can do, understand how these issues are affecting each other, how they're making each other worse, solving what issue would alleviate solving the other issues, and that helps also to prioritize the activities and agreements. In Yemen, for example, we help the parties to draft long-term peace agreements because they are not committing into short-term agreements without the long-term agreements either. looking at the cross impact of certain conflict drivers. Iraq, we were working on reconciliation strategy when ISIS was taking over Mosul, etc. There was a momentum for the traditional conflict parties to put together a reconciliation. Moldova, Transnistria, we've been helping together with CMA also in this project, the parties to look at various issues, not the political settlement of Transnistria, but looking at education, security, politics, economy, trade issues, border issues, together from various perspectives. We're working also for many other conflicts. And some of the problems that you face is the complexity of the actors. For example, in Syria, there have been 5,000 warring factions at some point waging war against each other. Carter Center in the US actually did an analysis with Palantir on different conflict actors in Syria, and you could say that it's a proxy war from start to beginning to the end. There's also a lot of intertwined issues. This is a picture where we did one analysis in the Middle East on drivers of violent extremism, how different issues are intertwined, how you should understand radicalization from multiple perspectives across different government sectors and actually work on it holistically. I can show you how we actually developed that map. I'm going to close soon. So Inclus is an inclusive risk management software, and the methodology brings different viewpoints, expertise, understanding behind the risk assessment to a single map. We're working a lot with companies, complex projects, enterprise risk management, but we're also working with societal problems. And we actually did an exercise before Finland applied to NATO. This is not real data, but we gathered some experts to analyze what are the risks involved in the Finnish NATO decision-making process, the likelihood of Russia doing an intervention before we are in NATO, what is the decision retaliation risk, what is the likelihood of Russia sort of retaliating after 12 months of that decision, what is the chronic risk after 12 months for Russia to do a military or otherwise so severe cyber attack towards Finland that it could be determined as opening of a war. And then what are the effects and likelihood of drifting to war? And we analyzed this from multiple perspectives and put the results together. But if I show you a little bit on how the tool is actually used, so we can engage people from different units, different expertises to flag different risks together. For example, what are most pressing issues, what should be managed, comment on those. Moving on to assessments, usually risks are managed by likelihood impact assessment. It can be something else as well, but usually likelihood and impact from different perspectives. Then commenting on why it's likely, what is the impact, what you should be doing about it, and then moving onwards to the sort of management side of things, understanding the data, for example, data exposure risk from different perspectives. In this visualization, you can see the squares are individual assessments, and people can also comment on those. Then we can build on common understanding on the analysis of that risk, because it's very hard to put a probability assessment, for example, for phenomena which is not clearly defined, etc. We can also do scenario analysis. So like we looked at the different scenarios, what is the probability of those drivers eventuating, what is the overall probability of each scenario, and also then assessing those, also monitoring over time how those scenarios are living. And if we look at the sort of cross-impact analysis as the latest or the last point in my lecture, we listed first what are the drivers of violent extremism, why people are taking up arms, why they are considering terrorism as an option. There's a hugely, this is done in the Middle East, but there's a lot of different drivers, crowdsourced from the neighboring regions of Syria, Iraq, people who are sort of affected by terrorism. Then we can assess what the denial of political rights and liberties mostly strongly affect. Well, probably social exclusion, social violence, lack of government credibility, perhaps also maybe hate speech, etc. So we can sort of map these interdependencies. We could also assess them from 1 to 5, how big is the impact, but this is also just a way to produce those links. So then we can see which of those issues are most intertwined and what is the sort of systemic nature of all of these issues. And we can have a look of systemic nature of these problems. For example, social bitterness, it was actually just a second. Social bitterness is one of the key drivers of terrorism in any society. And what is sort of driving social bitterness is also an interesting question. And there's multiple different issues, what is driving social bitterness, but what is driving those issues behind the issues that are driving social bitterness. So we need to understand these interlinkages and try to do systemically sort of impactful interventions in order to sort of understand also the sort of complexity behind these phenomena and risks. My time is up. I thank you for your interest and happy to answer if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Mikaeli Langinvainio. I was especially listening to you very carefully in the beginning when you presented these scenarios, what I think that people more or less all over the world are thinking about at the moment in Ukraine. And even if it's very hard to predict the future, how do you create these scenarios, what you just presented?
Yeah, so usually there's different ways to develop scenarios, different methods, but one of the ways is to come up with the baseline scenarios, the completely opposing possibilities. For example, there's only those 5 ways that the war in Ukraine can end. Either Russia loses, Ukraine loses, stalemate, peace agreement, or escalation. Those are the vectors. Then we start brainstorming on the indicators that would need to happen in order that scenario to happen. They might be indicators, they might be sort of triggering events, bigger situations escalating that scenario, and so on. And then we evaluate those indicators based on the probability and impact, and then come up with the probability of that whole scenario.
Hey, there's one question. What kind of preparations are mandatory, important, and good to have following on the scenarios?
Well, first of all, you should gather sort of multiple experts around the table representing all of the sort of societal sectors, in the sense that you don't miss a complete perspective. So security, cybersecurity experts, economy, information, diplomacy, security, military, etc. So you should have a varied sort of expert pool available when you start doing these assessments. Yeah.
What about when we are thinking about the future? Most of the time, especially when we are thinking about these kind of scenarios, they are pretty scary and pretty dark. Yeah. How you create positive scenarios?
Yeah, yeah. As a security analyst and risk management specialist, we are focusing quite a lot on the sort of negative threat models. But on the other hand, there's always positive sort of scenarios, and we sometimes actually add, when we are doing, for example, threat analysis, the other criteria is opportunity. So we are doing opportunity threat analysis because sometimes the same event or consequence might have also some negative effects, but some positive effects to others. So it's always the perspective that you are taking. But certainly we don't like to talk about risk management, but also risk and opportunity management. You're right, because there might be also opportunities and positive scenarios as well.
My last question, Mikaeli, I know this is a little bit unfair, but since I know you for a long time, I will ask you, from the scenario point of view, we are having the World Championships in football. Who will be the next champion?
That's a tricky one. Well, actually, maybe Brazil.
Okay, Brazil. Thank you very much, Mikaeli Langinvainio, coming here. Aalto University, as you come every day, but giving this lecture, and I am sure that this lecture, the recording as well, will be watched very widely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And let's have a short break. Our last lecturer in this lecture series, he is on his way. Not yet here, but let's stay in the lecture hall as well as online. We will continue after a short while. Okay, we will continue here in the lecture hall as well as online. And like mentioned, the last lecturer of this open lecture series in Aalto University this autumn is Sven Sakkov, who is the ambassador of Estonia to Finland. And I know that you love Finland very much as well. And you have been working with cybersecurity and security policy and security issues more or less all your life. For example, you are the former director in the cyber center of NATO in Estonia, Tallinn. So warm welcome, Sven. My first question actually to you is that when you are thinking about cybersecurity at the moment, what would you say, what is the number one hot topic in the cybersecurity field that you are especially following?
Well, is it on? Working? Right now it's everything what is related to Russian war in Ukraine, and of course, and kind of by trying to see what is happening in the cyber front in that. I would say maybe surprisingly little, or all those news are buried under the very heavy news what we have every day in terms of war. And basically physical destruction of a critical infrastructure of Ukraine with bombs and missiles, not necessarily with sophisticated cyber attack means.
Warm welcome, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone here and out there in front of your TVs or TV computer screens. Sven Sakkov is her name, as Jarno already introduced. Yes, I have done 2 years of hard labor in cybersecurity or cyber defense field at the CCDCOE, or Cyber Defense Center of Excellence of NATO in Tallinn. But most of my career has been in Ministry of Defense on a policy side, international relations in NATO, and now for the last 2 years in a diplomatic field in my second most favorite country in the world after Estonia. Now, when you are a diplomatic representative somewhere in a foreign country, of course, I mean, one thing what you are constantly thinking is what is your country famous for in this particular country you represent your country at. In Estonia, in Finland, for our Estonian diplomat, it's of course very easy. We are so close. Human contacts are so dense. Civil society contacts are so dense. Economic investment and so forth. But of course, this is only in very close neighbors where, let's say, we know each other very well. Estonia knows Finland, I would say, even better than Finland knows Estonia. So, but I mean, when you are in a faraway country, I don't know, Australia or India, so what could be Estonia known for? I mean, one could be, for example, it depends on the field of a person, education. We take pride that according to the PISA tests, our education is the best in the world. It used to be Finland, but not anymore. When you are in a startup digital field, most people know usually that Estonia has the biggest number of unicorns per capita in Europe, or that the venture capital raised for startups in Estonia is equal to none in Europe. So it's per person $750. The Finnish number is 250, and Finland is doing also quite well, meaning that only few countries actually in Europe are doing very well. By the way, in Estonia, we are world record holders on per capita calculations. When you are so small, everything you have to calculate in per capita, otherwise it's negligible what to talk about. So we do that by heart every time. And of course, I mean, some countries, in Japan, for example, probably Estonia is still famous for now retired sumo wrestler, Baruto. He's a very famous person also in Estonia. But of course, that's only very Japan and sumo specific. And in many countries, the rally driver Ott Tänak is probably well known. But, or let's say if in investment economic field, people would know that Estonia is it's best in terms of a tax competitiveness in the world, or the ease of doing business, things of that sort. But I would say that all in all, in most of the world, Estonia nowadays is known for the e-services, government e-services, or I would say basically e-governance. And this is the thing in Estonia. It used to be the case that you only need to see a bureaucrat in Estonia when you receive your passport or ID card from a passport office, or you marry, or you file for divorce, or you sell or buy real estate. Now during pandemic time also real estate can be bought and sold without seeing a bureaucrat or a government office. So basically everything is done online. You name the service, what a country provides, and this is done online, including voting, including, for example, I don't know, you pick a name for newborn son or daughter, and you name him or her legally online. Everything is online. And it is estimated that every average Estonian through that is saving 2 weeks of work time, where he or she is not basically dealing with paperwork. And it is saving at least 2% of the GDP, or basically adding 2% of the GDP to the whole of Estonia. Now, I think those of you who know Estonian history of the 20th century, I think we would all basically ask the same question. Who could have thought 30 years ago, in 1992, that actually a country being occupied by first Soviet Union, then Nazi Germany, and then by the Soviet Union again, would actually be known for making it very easy for its citizens and residents to do a business or any interaction with a government or a local authority. And I think lots of people have been trying to put together the number of reasons how it came possible. My list is the following 6. First is that you need a certain level of societal trust or trust to the authorities or for the authorities in order to make or basically induce people to use the e-services. In Estonian case, it is not known for a very high trust as a very high trust society. Finland, for example, is known for being a very high trust society. But in the early 90s and during the 90s, one thing was certain. People trusted and wanted to believe and trust in a new Estonia. There was a very, very strong distrust and hatred and resentment against the former Soviet occupation authorities, but that was the past. It was foreign, and this basically Estonia, what was built was new, ours, and where people gave it a lot of trust. Second is that we came out of a mismanaged, backward, especially when it comes to digital IT issues, occupation by the Soviet Union, and hence we did not have any really legacy systems. So basically, we did not have a situation where a ministry had just bought 2,000 electrical typewriters and told someone who wants to push for computers into a working culture of a ministry said that, are you crazy? We are good for another 20 years. We just bought the best electrical typewriters in the world. So we had nothing, and that was in a way a blessing in disguise because there were no legacy systems holding us back and no investment was done because there was nothing. I can give you just one illustration what it meant that my mother is an architect. She was an architect also during the Soviet occupation. And the architectural bureau, which was state-owned, or everything was state-owned, all the enterprises, shops and everything was state-owned. It had a copying machine, kind of Xerox machine, one. And that was basically the most guarded place in the whole building, architectural bureau, that was guarded by a specific KGB guy who only had the only key and was there when some of the architectural plans or the drawings had to be copied. Because God knows otherwise the architects can start copying illegal literature, for example, which is illegal in Soviet Union. So that gives you an idea of how can you actually develop a reasonable, let's say, digital future in a country where Xerox machine was a threat to a communist system. So the third, so is trust, no legacy systems. The third one is that Estonia has had and still continues mercifully to have a very good and strong kind of science base, both in school and in universities. As I said, I referred before that I'm in PISA tests, Estonian education system is the best. And it is including also in science. So I just looked it up today that according to the latest PISA tests, in science proficiency, Estonian kids are the best in the world, followed by Japanese, followed by Finnish, followed by South Korean, followed by Canadian kids. So basically we're talking about 15 years old, so where will be our future too. The fourth reason is a specific and something what I do not know too much about, but I've been told that Tallinn Technical University has had and is continuing to have a very strong school of cryptography and basically good scientists in that field, which of course comes handy nowadays. The fifth reason is that we were blessed by very good and well-off and scientifically savvy neighbors, Finland and Sweden, who helped a lot and who basically were themselves going in the same direction and were basically gave us also a good push. And then the sixth and last reason why it became possible was that there was an early push by the government in mid-1990s for the I don't know whether it's a word, internetization of Estonia, so that there was a internet and a computer at every school, every village school. How remote and how small, it did not matter. And that was started, this push, I think, around in 1994, 93, by the then Estonian ambassador to United States, Toomas Hendrik Ilves, who later became a foreign minister and later president of the republic. And already when he was in Washington, he kind of started pushing for what he termed a tiger leap in terms of actually making internet and computers available everywhere in Estonia, or basically, of course, it was not everywhere, but in schools and where basically a state could do something about that. So that all led to actually a situation where in October 2002, so we just had the 20th anniversary of this milestone, when the first digital agreement was signed on the 7th of October 2002 in the whole world, between actually, interestingly, mayors or the kind of city leaders, kaupunginjohtajad of Tallinn and Tartu on some cooperation agreement or something of that sort. Doesn't really matter, but this was actually the first one. By the way, the first international agreement which was signed digitally was done between prime ministers of Estonia and Finland. But I do not remember the year. Maybe someone knows here or remembers. But that was, of course, later. And now, 20 years later, we have Estonians, and we have only 1.3 million people, have given around 800 million digital signatures, either using their ID card or mobile ID or the e-ID, basically ID which is does not require to have a specific a device with a chip in it. And as I said, all the government services are online using the same safe and secure system, including elections. So during the last elections in 2019, general elections, 44% of the votes were cast online. and I expect we will have elections now 1 month before Finland next year, on the 5th of March. I expect that would be then over half of the votes to be cast online. This is really simple, easy, and very intuitive to use. And by the way, for example, if you would ask me, I've voted online, I think, since probably 2005, minus the last general election, when actually I wanted to show kids what election means. So we actually went as a civil schooling demonstration with kids to the polling booth, and it was very odd, actually, I have to say, filling in a paper, because I had not done that for the previous nearly 15 years. So when it comes to what will be the next steps in the kind of rolling out of different e-services in Estonia, then the next one, which those people who are developing that are very proud of, I think it would be called in English a predictive e-services. That basically means that to take the same example of a young family is having a newborn, and because the country already has information of where you live, that the kid has been born, this is the name which the parents have chosen and registered online, that already you don't have to be looking for a kindergarten. It's already will be offered to you, basically. This is kind of, there will be push in terms of services. But basically, okay, your kid is ready to for a kindergarten in 3 years' time or 2 years' time. Here is the list in your region. Here are the vacations. This is the way to apply, or basically push this button and so forth. And everything else, including, you can have everything what you want in the same way, meaning that you don't, the citizen or a resident does not have to look for and imagine, okay, what do I need to do? But actually, because the state knows what services it offers, it is basically pushing them, saying, okay, here's options. You don't have to, but I mean, here are the options. We kind of remind you that this is what would be a good idea to be done. Now, and then I think a big growth area in the future would be how we can actually do more and more, or use more and more of those e-services across the borders, especially among those countries where a lot of people are living on our side. As I said, Estonian population is 1.3 million. Around 70 to 80 to 90, it's very hard to know exactly, 1,000 Estonians. So we are talking about 5, 6, 7% of Estonian population is living either all the time, and I'm talking Estonian citizens, living all the time in Finland, being residents here, or are traveling back and forth on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, meaning the residence is in Estonia, families in Estonia, but their work is here. And basically how we make sure that those people who are traveling for work or leisure inside the European Union can actually use their services also when it comes to government services on the west side. There are some instances where we have managed that together with Finland. The first one which was running now maybe 2 or 3 years ago was the e-recipe, so that when you get a recipe from a doctor in Estonia, I can go to a pharmacy in Finland and receive my medicine, or vice versa, a recipe in Finland would work in Estonia too. And then there are some registries what are used mostly by, let's say, officials what are working across our two borders. We talk about population registry, tax registry, and things like that. But those are not usually used by the citizens, but by the basically officials. My dream is that there will be more and more e-services usable by the people, for example, or by citizens. For example, just giving you one example, there are the Finnish pensioners seem to like Estonian spas very much. So they go to spa cities like Haapsalu, Pärnu, or Kuressaare and get all the treatment. And there are also doctors, and the doctors can, take all the measurements and so forth. This is a big kind of business in a way. But that will be separate from kind of the Finnish information system. So if they take a blood test, for example, or any other medical procedure in Estonia, this does not find its way into a omakanda.fi, and vice versa also, of course. So I had some health issues here 1.5 years ago. In the end, the only way for me to transfer that back to Estonia was it had to be printed out. So I'll be taking one-day papers to my doctor in Estonia. Papers will be in Finnish, saying, okay, here is what needs to be in my, which in Estonian is digilugu, basically my medical records, which in Estonia everything only online. So I even have no idea what my GP will be doing with those papers in the end. Inside the EU, there should be better ways of doing such kind of things. Now, of course, when we talk about all the digital services and e-governance in any country, this goes without saying that you need to protect that. You need to be able to secure that. You need to be able to make sure that those services work also in adverse situation, and this is basically where I will be taking my presentation forward now in a second. Maybe just to add to the previous one, which I omitted before, is that of course all those the e-services, electronic identification, electronic signature, and so forth, they are all, basically very firmly rooted in laws. Every Estonian who is born will get not just the name, but also the electronic kind of identity number. The electronic signature is the same right and legal ramifications as the physical signature, and so forth. So it is kind of, it's not just something what is happening. It's just kind of rooted in law. There is a system built for that. There is and this is how it was done, and I'm not an expert on that, so don't ask me too specific questions. But how it was done in a way is that there was no push for all the government agencies or local government agencies to standardize their services so that every kind of e-service would be standardized, but rather they basically transfer information between those was standardized. It's called X-Road, or basically we have a backbone system where information is traveling in between different databases. By the way, the same X-Road is now used also in Finland. In Finland, what is called palveluväylä. And I think Iceland is also going to use that. There is a kind of one international initiative called NIS, Nordic Interoperability Initiative Solution, something of that sort, which basically is taking care of that this type of backbone standard, palveluväylä or X-Road in Estonian, could be used also by other countries. And by the way, Estonia gave that basically the source code for the palveluväylä free of charge for Finland to be used. Now, coming back to defending what you have. I think we all, basically all those people who have studied cybersecurity, cyber defense issues, there is always one chapter in any of those books dedicated to the 2007 cyber attacks against Estonia, when a Soviet war monument was located from a busy city intersection and a bus stop to a military cemetery, which should be quite a kind of mundane thing, but basically our neighbor created a big issue out of it, and Estonia was subjugated to days and days of DDoS attacks, quite crude, but massive in the scales of that time in 2007. What it means? It first, of course, means that also in 2007 already Estonia was a target-rich environment for a foreign country to organize a kind of organized, concerted cyber attack against the whole country and its information outlets, media, government services, and so forth, and banks. And there was a couple of days of discomfort. Nothing serious mercifully happened, meaning that there was no let's say physical damage to any systems and so forth, so the kind of power grids or power generation systems or anything of that sort were not attacked. But because there were uncertain times, there were riots in Tallinn street, of course, already the fact that you are not able to read the newspaper online was psychologically very kind of hard for people. So kind of psychologically it had a much stronger effect, I would say, than actual effect was. By the way, now, a couple of months ago when at the basically height of a Russian war of aggression in Europe, Estonia relocated a Soviet tank monument. There was a couple of days of very substantial state-organized cyber attacks against Estonian critical information infrastructure. And I have to say that no one noticed. Basically means that, and they were by far the biggest what we have had, but the defenses were good. There might have been a half an hour break in some specific service, but you were not able to detect it, and that was not really in the news. later Cyber Defense and Digital Agency, Riigi Infosüsteemide Amet in Estonia, or in English it is Information Systems Authority, basically later said that by the way, last week we have this and that, but that was not an issue in a way that we have learned to deal also with massive DDoS. Now one of the very specific things which I will not say came out from 2007 cyber attacks, but we were able to use the 2007 in order to make the case for was the NATO Cyber Center of Excellence in Estonia, which I had a pleasure of leading between 2015 and 2017. Because we had proposed Estonia had proposed to our NATO friends and partners many years ago, before that already, or basically 4 years before that, an idea to establish a Center of Excellence on Cyber Defense. And we had no traction for that. Countries were saying, but this is not a task for the military or for NATO. This is something what, guys in a basement with a t-shirt do, something with cyber think, So there was kind of no understanding that this is actually an important state-level societal issue, and that you have to be able to prepare not just at the individual level or a company level, but also at the state level, including through international cooperation to the basically possibility of cyber attacks. After 2007, state-orchestrated cyber attacks against Estonia, we got the ball rolling very quickly. Countries realized that, this is actually important stuff. And very quickly, in 1 year later already, the center was established. People were working together on issues. So what does a CCDCOE do? Mainly three things: research, training, and exercises. And most famous exercises are, or the most famous one exercise is lock shields, which I have a video to show you in order to give you an understanding, basically when I say a cyber exercise, what it means. I don't think it says here in the audio, but this is the largest in the world, globally, international live fire cyber defense exercise. The main training audience of that exercise are defenders, so-called blue teams, and everyone else is basically there in order to entertain them. The red team to attack them, green team which has built up a virtual network of virtual machines. I think this year there were like 5,000 or something virtualized machines, and a white team which are judges and exercise controllers, so I'm just thinking there's a yellow team too, but I think they were, I can't remember what the yellow team did. Does not matter. Anyway, we'll have a look at whether the video works, and then we will continue. There we go. Should I do it again? And I hope it is also visible online. This is a video is from YouTube. So if you want to have another look later, it's basically Lock Shields 2022. You can look at the previous videos too. This year, by the way, the winner was Finland, the team of Finland. Finland is also, despite not yet member of full member of CCDCOE, it has been a contributing partner for many years, and those can also take part in a log shields exercise. As the video is worked on, I say that, I mean, this is the flagship exercise of the CCDCOE, and this is basically, it depends on the country who the country wants to be members of a blue team. The blue team can be 20 or 50 or 70 people. There's no limit for that. It's up to the country. But basically, we are given a set of, basically a virtual network of machines. Some are also represented, or basically there are PLCs with a kind of firecracker. So, you know, if there's something shooting up, this basically is a visualization that this PLC was kind of taken over, or this machine was broken down by the attackers. It's basically we over the years we have had drones, we have air defense systems in play, water purification, electricity grids, the telecom equipment. Ericsson was there basically, so that the red team has a possibility to develop attacks in many different areas and so forth. But how is video going?
We will watch it in YouTube. So log shields.
But maybe
2022.
Can we just open a browser and open it from YouTube? Okay, all right. Well, maybe we'll come back to that later. It's a nice 2.5 minute video. Do I still have time? Yeah, I do. A bit. By the way, this is not the only big cyber exercise which is organized in Estonia. Right now, this week, there's actually a cyber coalition going on, which is the biggest, let's say, NATO exercise, which is under NATO flag, because CCDCOE is like NATO affiliated organization. It's not part of a NATO bureaucracy. I think there would be a lot to talk about, but I'm not a good expert on how the critical information infrastructure is being protected in Estonia and what are the legal ramifications for that. It really basically depends on how much a cyber agency has a possibility of telling a, for example, telecom provider or a water purification company or electricity company, what are the standards they have to follow when it comes to cyber defense. But there are some ways and measures how actually those say government can help private companies which are deemed by the government to be of critical importance for the continuation of a normal way of life. Basically electricity, water, things like that, what you would normally think of that. And one of the things what has been done in Estonia, I will say that sentence and then we'll look at video, is that we, in order to protect our digital way of life, we have set up the things which are called the data embassies, meaning that all the information what is used in Estonian e-governance business is backed up and also backed out outside of Estonia in a couple of undisclosed locations, what we call data embassies. And that basically means that if Estonia and all the systems will be wiped off in Estonia, we can reboot, and actually the data is there. Data would not be lost. Data is replicated many times in different locations, in safe places. But let's have a look now at the log shields. I cannot remember whether it was basically said what the number of participants this year was. I think it's, was it maybe, I don't know, 1,000, something of that sort. It's a distributed exercise where most of the blue teams are in their home country. The organizing teams are in Estonia. So when you saw the blue T-shirts, they were basically also filming where the Estonian team was working, basically the main training audience, the defenders. Now they, in order to give us some time for Q&A, and we are running out of time very quickly, they maybe some words on what is happening in Ukraine, because there are some people who have said that this has been a big surprise, that the Russian side has not used too much of a cyber attacks against the Ukrainian state and infrastructure. I have not researched that. Maybe among the audience there is someone who has, but actually understand that there has been happened a lot. It's basically overshadowed by all the other events what we have, atrocities and real bombs. The times when basically something is not happening because it has been derailed by a cyber attack does not cross the news threshold. And of course, we have seen previously from years like 2015 and 2016, and both times some parts of the Ukrainian electricity grid was attacked by cyber attack, Russian cyber attack. That they were planning and they were basically rehearsing for that already for many years. And of course, we might also want to remember that the NotPetya was also meant against Ukrainian targets, but basically got loose from there. I can't remember what year, but NotPetya was probably, I think, 2017, I think. So I think in short, there are probably things what we will be learning and researchers will be researching in the future. But I think it also has shown that Russia itself, which has been depicted, I would say, as a 10 feet tall when it comes to cyber attack capabilities, is actually its own systems have been quite weak and sometimes explored basically by the Ukrainian side. I'm talking about TV and so forth, what have been quite spectacular things in the beginning of the war. At least haven't read too much about that lately. But I think this is, as a final note, this is what we have seen in a way is in a way vindication to what Estonia has been pushing for in NATO and European Union since 2014, and we've been warning our friends that this is not the end, this is just the beginning of Russian conquest. We should be ready. They will be going further, and we should basically invest in defense, also not just against cyber attacks, which usually is an Estonian topic, but also about real physical attacks by tanks, aircraft, and so forth. Back in 2014-15, we were very often told politely by our friends But don't worry about tanks. All the new wars will be hybrid. So worry about little green men, cyber attacks, information attacks, and things like that. But it is very unlikely that actually there will be hot war of metal and explosives in Europe. Turns out that was not true, and the big cataclysmic horrible war is upon Europe, and we need to prepare that, but at the same time, so basically what I want to say is that all the different hybrid influencing tools what countries, especially Russia, is using, including cyber attacks tools, they do not replace the old established classical threats, but are adding to the complexity of a battlefield of modern day. And of course, in the future, we might have new complexities added to that. I will end here and open the floor to questions. If there are any, I don't know how the online questions reach us.
Thank you, Sven. That was very, very interesting. We do have some online questions. You can actually read them here, or I can read them aloud.
I can maybe also read it from here.
Yes.
Okay. There's actually first is a invitation, which I hope that it will be sent through organizers to me to one critical communications world event in Messukeskus. I'm not gonna. So this next one is: how do you see the evolution of critical communications serving public safety and disaster relief, as well as critical infrastructure in Estonia? They currently Esther Bayer-Rix using Tetra. A very specific question for me. When we talk about all the civil emergency preparations, by the way, I think Finland is way ahead from Estonia in that sense. When it comes to civil protection of its population, whether it's bomb shelters, whether it's how the information, basically how also people behave in terms of following government or some agency's suggestion, and for example, having some food and water supplies at home and batteries and things like that. In Estonia, I think we are trying to catch up. We have had some interesting cases in Estonia in last years when for a technical, non-cyber technical reasons, there was no power in terms of a territory, maybe 1/6 of Estonian territory in the southeast. It was summertime or the springtime, and I think the power cut was maybe 10 hours, something of that sort. And of course, we have regular storms, as Finland does. So, I mean, some parts of Estonia are sometimes witnessing power cuts. And then basically, it's a good exercise, real life exercise. So, what are the things what people do not realize what do not work, for example. But, for example, there is no, you cannot get gas from a gas station. Gas is there, even if you have cash, for example. If they, because of there's no electricity and internet is not functioning, and the card system, payment system is not functioning, but you need electricity to pump the gas out of the storage, for example, things like that. But all in all, I mean, this experience in Võru was that after 2 hours, because people started actually talking to their neighbors, the party started, people went out to the street, was a very different experience in a way. Usually people are sitting in front in very loneliness at home on a sofa and scrolling with social media. And now we actually went out. So our neighbors and friends, it was actually a positive experience from that sort. But I think we have a lot to improve there. Now the last question here is that what kind of preparations are mandatory, important and good to have following on the scenarios?
Yeah, that was actually a question for Mikaeli, but if you have an interesting answer, of course.
I do not know what scenarios he was talking about, and so hence I would not take this. So maybe the yeah. Is there any question from here? This one here.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for a very interesting perspective. In terms of e-governance, I have, like, most of the systems are online. The main concern is that you told about online elections, right? Voting online. Yes. So there are concerns of election tampering due to the security of these online systems. How does Estonia or how does the government tackle that, and how does it restore confidence in the people to use these e-voting systems? And secondly, in the light of development of quantum computing, these traditional cryptographic techniques, they will be obsolete, right? So most of the e-governance systems use them. What are the plans of nations that have a very heavily focus on e-governance to be prepared for this development? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Did I just checking? The first part of it, the first question was basically how you build confidence for the citizens to use e-voting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Starting from the second one, from the quantum computing, I think to what I know, you are exactly right. That would make all those encryptions breakable, all the basically what are now cryptographically safe things unsafe. I think the main issue is that the Estonian system is built up in a way that it can also accommodate new technology, meaning this is not technology specific. So my understanding it, but I have not, I'm not a kind of expert on that, is that they, when they, and this is always in security, in war, always the same cycle, that they there is a breakthrough in terms of a attack capacity, and then followed by a breakthrough advancement in defense capacity. So that with a quantum computing also comes quantum encryption, for example, and things like that. Whether there will be a window of vulnerability during some time, I do not know. Quantum kind of computing in a, let's say, large scale in terms of qubits and so forth is of course something which is always like, 10 years from now, and I think is kind of rolling further into the future. But yes, if it one day is, if it comes one day, a lot of things what we hold as true now might not be. And I think it's not just about that. I mean, it's all our digital life what will be under, let's say, scrutiny and so forth. And I think I'm also very. I usually, if you bet on the human ingenuity and and spirit of capitalism and free enterprise to work when you usually win. Meaning that if there is such a problem of such a magnitude, it's not about Estonia, it's about actually everything what we do. All the way also, let's say, online defense is what we have, either personally or on the organizational level. And the quantum computing is is such a menace, in a way, to that. It basically means there will be billions and if not trillions to be made. And when people will put their mind into it and do that, maybe some technology what we cannot imagine right now. On the way how to create the trust, or how to make people, or how to induce people to trust the voting system, or the e-governance e-voting system. The first is that what I was blessing in Estonia was that we had some big businesses which were early adapters of digital solutions and basically ID card and mobile ID, and they were banks, big banks, which used to be Estonian banks, but are now mostly owned by big Swedish banks, banking corporations like SEB Bank or a Swedbank. But they were built up, they were basically established Estonian banks. And so those banks had a interest in making people use e-banking. Government provided a legal basis and the ID cards or mobile IDs for the people, and the banks are using that. And basically, I would say that builds a trust when people see that actually a bank is trusting the security. So can I. So people started trusting the bank with basically electronic banking, e-banking, also with their money. And basically, if you trust someone and this digital system you operate on online banking with your money, I mean, when basically kind of, you lead it from here. Basically there will be more and more services added to that. Very quickly, what caught up was a ability to declare your taxes online. And there is a peculiar competition in Estonia among the famous people and social media influencers, and how quickly fill in their tax declaration and sign it and send it. So there are some who say that it took them 3 minutes while sitting in front of a laptop in a Luxembourg airport, for example, things like that. Because it's already all pre-filled, because the only authorization you give is basically for authorizing the bank to give a specific information when it comes to your income to the tax authorities. All the forms are already pre-filled, so you just have to check whether everything is okay. And there are some maybe tax deductions and so forth which take time, but I mean, for a person like me whose tax declarations are very easy to do, I mean, for me it's 5 minutes. Think of, for example, in the United States, people do it like 2 weeks. They have 20 lawyers working on that, and it's kind of a big pack of paper in the end. It's a big operation. For us, this is very easy. So that was another one. And then basically this kind of, that builds up, because it's not just about a legal system, it's not just about the physical kind of a chip card in a way, like in cybersecurity, that there's something your pins and something you own, a chip, ID card, or a chip in your phone, and providing for the way of kind of two certificates, like digital certificates, one to identify yourself, another one allowing you to sign documents, including basically signing a document that you participate in an election, but actually your vote is still anonymous and things like that. And again, this has started on the first election when the e-voting was possible. I think it was, if I remember correctly, 2% of the votes were cast online. So that was nearly 20 years ago. And now I predict it will be over 50. So legal framework, electronic identity provided by the country, chip, basically, if you have this kind of a system. I mean, nowadays we also have this EID, which does not require anything actually owned. Early adopters, like banks, in our case. Practice, meaning that kind of, people get used to that and do more and more things online. And there you have it. But I think what is really, for me, important, and maybe we can draw it to a close here if there are no pressing questions, because it's getting late, is that when it comes to specifically voting, this is important not just from a point of view of making it easy for the citizens, but actually also making or inducing new generations of voters to vote. Because for the young kids who will be going to their first elections, whether in Finland or Estonia next year, for them the idea actually that you go into some place and you get a piece of paper and your name is somewhere in a list, and then it's kind of the list will be looked through and your name will be found, and then you show your ID and you get a sign. For people who are turning 18, this is nonsense. I mean, their lives are online. We do everything online, and then actually the idea of actually having to vote somewhere in a booth in a specific day is absurd. So if you actually make that easy, intuitive for young people, I think we also, among other things, we help to preserve the democracy or let's say participation in democratic process for the future, giving the democracy also bigger legitimacy in the future. Because if we basically are not making that easy and online for kids, then I think there will be less of them voting, and that will not be good for the health of our future democratic societies, because always, everywhere it's the same. The younger generations are voting less than older ones. And in Estonia, I have no numbers with me right now, but what I remember, this delta is smallest in Estonia. And there might be a reason for that. I think this is a reason. It's not just that in Estonia, for some reason, young people take more interest in politics, but actually it's easy to participate in elections because it's, it takes 2 minutes on your computer, you're done. And you can continue other things. Well, thank you very much here and online. It was a pleasure, and thanks for taking your time in this dark. It's still November. It's dark November evening. Thank you very much.
All right, now the mic is on. Thank you, Sven, for the lecture and discussion. And Unfortunately, this is now the end of the lecture series this year. So once again, thank you to all of our speakers, and of course, thank you to our audience as well, both here in the lecture hall and online. And hopefully we'll see you next year. Thank you.